From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to take you inside the making of TT's 2022 Top 100 For-Hire Carriers list, which we just published on June 20th, both in print and online at ttnews.com. This Top 100 list is one of our flagship products at Transport Topics. Each year, we compile data on the largest for-hire trucking companies in North America and produce an annual Top 100 ranking based on full-year revenue. The publication also includes updated information on each company's equipment, leadership, business units, and service offerings. In addition to the main Top 100 list, we produce separate industry sector rankings that list the largest companies in each segment of the trucking industry, from dry van truckload to refrigerated, flatbed, intermodal, parcel delivery, and more. To discuss how we put this all together, I'm going to bring in my colleague, Marissa Gamache, Features Coordinator at Transport Topics. Thanks for joining us, Marissa.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Seth. I'm really happy to be here.
So just to kick things off here, I'd like to ask you to walk our listeners through the process of assembling the Top 100. This is a really big project at TT. It's months in the making. It starts with the carrier surveys we send out, and it involves a lot of compilation of information from different sources, and then finally releasing our updated ranking. So just walk us through that whole process.
Yeah, for sure. We get started on this. It's kind of a year-round thing in terms of keeping our ear to the ground on the biggest companies out there and the mergers and acquisitions that are going on. So we really are trying to keep our eyes out for stuff that will pique interest come springtime when we really get ready to put this publication together. So we really start off with that institutional knowledge and build by sending out a survey to all of our contacts and just trying to get as much information as we can, looking at revenues for these companies and, how many tractors and trailers that they're running for the latest year, asking companies kind of what they're up against in the current climates. And through those surveys, we work to rank companies from largest revenue to smallest. Filling in the holes along the way, we use SEC information and really comb through those 10Ks for those publicly traded companies that are on our list to ensure that we have a well-rounded representation of the for-hire companies that are out there. We then use that information and kind of partner with SJ Consulting to see where maybe some holes are in our sector lists to ensure that we really get those parsed out revenues. That really helps us give a full view of what a company has to offer as opposed to just a top 100 ranking. There's a lot of smaller companies out there that deserve an opportunity to be on a list, but unfortunately they don't make that top 100. So our sector lists are a great opportunity to highlight that revenue for those companies. And so once we pull that together, we work with our team in-house to ensure accuracy, and then we get it ready for rollout online. And that's kind of, something that we pride ourselves on and look forward to the opportunity to share that with you. And, now that it's out there, we're just really proud of what's been done. And there's always little tweaks here and there, but really we rely heavily on companies for their buy-in in the beginning and participation. And it's just a lot of back and forth communication to ensure that we get to the finish line.
Well, that's certainly the case. There's so many calls and emails and back and forth to really put a finer point on some of these numbers. And I think we can be very proud of the product we finally release each year. And it certainly is a point of pride for a lot of the companies that do appear on the top 100 list, especially if they're a newer company that's made the list maybe for the first time, something that can be really seen as an accomplishment for the growth of a company, and really landing on one of the premier lists and publications that covers the industry. And you're very much on the radar once you are a top 100 company. You are among, maybe you're not the biggest, but you are among the very large companies that are moving North America's freight via truck. So with that, I'd like to dive into this year's rankings a little bit. Marissa, I'll eventually turn this over to you for your observations, but I'll start with a few thoughts of my own. Of course, just starting at the top here, it comes as no surprise that UPS and FedEx are number 1 and 2 by a wide margin. That's, didn't take any rocket science involved to predict that. But looking a little bit further down the list, you'll see LTL carrier XPO Logistics is still there at number three, despite a lot of changes going on at that company. Of course, XPO spun off its contract logistics business last year, and they also plan to split off their freight brokerage operations later this year. So a lot of changes, but is, of course, a very large LTL carrier, and is currently number three on the top 100. The rest of the top five is also unchanged. You have intermodal and trucking company JB Hunt is at number four, and Canadian trucking conglomerate TFI International is there at number five. And of course, as you'll recall, TFI really expanded its LTL operations last year through its purchase of UPS's freight division. So that was a big change that we indicated last year. And once again, that shows up on this year's list with TFI in our top five. One company that did make a pretty significant move up the list this year was Landstar System. They're up 3 spots to number 6 this year with 58% revenue growth in 2021. So it was a banner year for lots of trucking companies, but certainly the case at Landstar with growth at that level. Of course, Landstar operates through a network of independent owner operators and freight brokerage agents. So they're a little bit of a different business model than some of the other companies on the list. And then some interesting new names further down the list. So if you look down at number 74, Quantix Supply Chain Solutions is a dry bulk and liquid chemical carrier. It was previously known as A&R Logistics before they rebranded as Quantix last year. So that's a company that had been on the list before, but now under a new name. And we also have 10 new companies that joined the top 100 this year. One example of that is number 82, Dependable Supply Chain Services. It's a Los Angeles-based provider of LTL and truckload transportation, also warehousing and logistics services. Some other newcomers to the list are Leonard's Express, Western Flyer Express, BMAC Trucking, New Legend Inc., Oak Harbor Freight Lines, Transservice Logistics has been on in the past, is back on the list now. Archer Express, Pascal Truck Lines, and Paper Transport Inc. just cracks the list at number 100. And then one notable departure that I'll mention from this year's top 100 is Central Freight Lines, an LTL carrier that shut down late last year after nearly a century in business. So they were number 98 a year ago, but of course are no longer on the list since closing their doors. With that, Marissa, I'd like to hear some of your takeaways from this year's list. When you put this all together and you look back on it, what are some of the companies and ranking changes that really stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on a lot of the large ones out there. I think there's a lot of these mid-range companies that are getting really close to that 1 billion mark. Number 42, Bennett International Group. For a company of their size, I just think that they saw some really great growth. They grew over 44%, and now they're just shy of 1 billion. So where they're sitting, I mean, they were able to jump comfortably from 54 to 42 this year. And I think, that has a lot to do with the different acquisitions and business models. But if you look right below them as well, we've got IMC companies, and they saw 118% growth. Again, just getting them just shy of that 1 billion at 983 million. IMC went from number 72 last year to 43 this year. So I think a lot of these middle range companies that have, they're large, don't get me wrong, but they've really been cornering the market on what they do best, and it's paying off. And I mean, IMC companies really focuses on intermodal and drayage. And as we've seen the last year, that has been a hot spot for freight and just a really, really aggressive market. So coming in at number 43, while a huge growth, not surprising. I did want to note, number 66 this year, Heartland Express. They're a publicly traded company out there, and they actually shrunk. They dropped almost 6%, and they went from number 56 on the list last year to 66. And, I don't know exactly what was going on with that. I looked into their 10K and stuff. And I mean, every company has good years and bad years. I think it's, not as normal to see a drop in revenue for a lot of these companies with how strong 2021 was for them. But I did want to note that because, a lot of these companies are pushing up on the list as opposed to dropping down. And I did just want to say, like, a little inconsistent with that, but I have no doubt that they'll pull up. And I mean, their net income grew, so you kind of have to leverage those two together and see that there might be a little bit of a less total net revenue, but they're doing something right. So that's kind of where I've seen in terms of top 100 companies really cornering in on that middle market has been interesting for me.
From time to time, an issue commands so much of the industry's attention that it requires a deeper dive, a resource readers can turn to, a Transport Topics special report. We're turning our attention to another big issue, electrification and the key factors that will drive this industry trend. In every case, we're working to provide our readers with information, analysis, and clarity on key issues confronting fleets. One comprehensive resource packed with insights that can give you the edge. Transport Topics invites you to learn more about our special reports. To reserve your copy of the latest special report, visit ttn.ws/electrification.
As you mentioned, really across the board, we've seen the overwhelming majority of these companies have really increased their revenue over the course of 2021. Which is the time frame that we're examining for full year revenue for these rankings. But it's not across the board. Different companies face different operational challenges. So every company's situation is a little bit unique. I should mention again that the full top 100 list, as well as the industry sector lists, are available online now at ttnews.com. So if you're hearing about it for the first time on this podcast, do be sure to check it out. And you can even follow along and check out the rankings as you listen. So, as we were putting this publication together, I mentioned this earlier, but it really did strike me just how much revenue growth we saw across the industry. Freight demand, of course, was really strong last year during the economic rebound from the coronavirus pandemic. Capacity was extremely tight for quite a while. So in that environment, large trucking companies generally were able to raise rates, and in many cases, they increased driver pay significantly, on the strength of those rate increases. And when you skim through our top 100 list, if you check the revenues column as well as the profit column, net income, you generally see growth. You generally see pretty significant growth. So, Marissa, just what are your thoughts on the business conditions for trucking companies last year, based on some of that information that we've published alongside our top 100 rankings?
Yeah, Seth, I think business conditions were really good, and I think that they were strong. Specifically, I mean, we'll get into sectors later, but really strong in the dedicated and truckload sector, as well as the intermodal and drayage. When I was really looking in at the companies that have an innate focus in those areas, they came out, I think, the best for the year. I think a lot of suppliers were looking for consistency across the board, and being able to hone in on those two areas meant, pushing forward and having a successful year, despite the fact that things were so tight. So when I'm looking at these companies, I mean, much like when we were looking earlier in the year at logistics, this was another year of banner growth. And I think, despite the fact that there is still a really tight market on drivers and the driver shortage is definitely still prevalent out there more than ever, companies, I think, are settling in and figuring out the tools that need to be implemented to keep these drivers up and running and to keep them with the company. And like you said, driver pay has made some great steps in the last year. And I think the companies that we see on this top 100 that focused on driver incentives and driver based, pushes reaped the rewards. They were paid probably twice fold because of those moves. In terms of overall business condition for last year, I think anyone looking at the numbers in our top 100, you don't get 40% growth on just a regular year. So when we're looking at companies where anywhere from 5 to 40% is normal, and dare I say 20 plus was a very average number. Yeah, I'd like to be running a trucking company if I were them. So I just think that overall we had some shining lights, but business was strong. And I think companies were really realizing what it took to get strength. And I think that there's going to be a good amount of momentum into this year. But as we fast forward to 2022 and 2023, I think it starts to get more crystal bally.
For sure, and it's always a lot easier to look back than it is to look forward. But yeah, I think that your point on drivers was a very important one. The real struggle was workforce development. If you're a large fleet operation, yes, there's been some challenges in the supply chain with equipment. Getting new trucks and trailers that you've ordered, and maybe you're waiting longer because of some of the parts shortages and semiconductor shortages that the manufacturers are dealing with. But the true constraint on capacity has been drivers for the most part, and the fleets really did pull out all the stops, trying to make the jobs as attractive as possible for their drivers, to keep the drivers who are in place, and also recruit some new ones. And that's a real challenge, is what I've heard, really across the industry, especially in the long haul, over the road truckload. It's just a really tough uh, job to fill. But we've seen just a laser focus on that, from the most successful fleets, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. That's still a key issue for the industry moving forward. Um, and yes, of course, last year was really a banner year for the trucking industry in terms of the business environment, and that's started to turn potentially somewhat this year. Certainly in the spot market, we saw the spot market certainly has cooled off, to say the least. In the contract rates side, it's held up much better. But of course, there is some lingering economic uncertainty out there, with inflation, high levels of inflation, and some other question marks about the global economy as well, international conflicts, and continued supply chain issues, with more fallout from the pandemic. So perhaps the road ahead is not as clear, but certainly looking back, we can appreciate just how good a year 2021 was for trucking. Another trend I wanted to talk about on this podcast is mergers and acquisitions, and that's been a trend really for years now. But we've continued to see more examples of that in the past year. So one of the high profile changes reflected on this year's list is two regional e-commerce parcel carriers, LaserShip and OnTrack. They announced last year that they created a nationwide last mile delivery service, really for online retailers and other shippers. So that combined company now moves up to number 27 on the top 100. And the goal is to build a coast to coast final mile delivery network. LaserShip operates primarily in the eastern U.S., and OnTrack has a footprint in the western U.S., and you can combine the two networks to create a national parcel service for e-commerce delivery. And that's something that we'll watch closely over time, and that's a big change on our list. Two companies that were ranked now combined. And another deal I'd like to highlight is the acquisition of Quality Carriers by CSX, so a railroad operator. Quality Carriers, of course, is one of North America's largest bulk transporters, and it now operates as a standalone business within CSX. But Marissa, I'd like to turn it over to you. Are there any other mergers or acquisitions or spinoffs that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, for sure, Seth. I think one big one that was interesting that closed in January of this year, number 8 on the list, Schneider. They acquired Midwest Logistics Systems, and that was big for them. They got in that over 1,000 drivers with 900 tractors in 30 central U.S. locations. So I think that really bolsters that's a huge acquisition there, and I think just really strong for them. Number 36, PS Logistics. They acquired a smaller company, JLT Services, but for a company that's in that mid range on the list, like I'm saying, I think that focus of small and steady growth really comes from small acquisitions. And I mean, they got 32 trucks, but they also got drivers. And in the tight market that we're in, if you've got, an opportunity to grab a company and acquire them with all these assets, it's hard to get tractors delivered. It's hard to find drivers. And I think that acquisition for them was super smart. Another company, Mullen Group, they're number 52 on the list just this year, but they've spent so much money on acquisitions. I think they're in the double digits for last year in terms of how many companies they've acquired. And they really have rounded out their portfolio with a couple 3PL companies. And they also acquired a transportation management system company. So just really getting some proprietary software and rounding out, I think, start to finish offerings as a whole group. When you can keep it in house, I think you really can just capitalize on profits. And so the acquisitions that I was seeing of Mullen Group, they were really smart in trying to really cover the basis of any holes that are left in what they offer. So all of those companies, I think, they were definitely looking to make growth in areas that they didn't maybe have strong sectors. So that's kind of what I saw this year.
No, well, thank you for that. And, yet again, just another year of M&A activity, gradually, changing the playing field in the industry. And yes, we see some of the big players keep getting bigger, but we also see mid-sized companies grow, both through acquisition and organically. And new companies, especially just smaller fleets, and have entered the industry as well over the past year with market conditions being so strong. And we'll see how that looks as we move deeper into 2022 moving forward. Beyond the top 100, we've been talking mostly about our main top 100 list. We also include several separate industry sector lists that we've referenced a couple times already. We're really trying to rank the largest companies within a specific application, whether it be truckload, LTL, refrigerated, flatbed, intermodal, parcel couriers. So when we look at the sector lists, Marissa, are there any big changes or points of interest that you'd like to discuss as you look them over?
Yeah, I think, if we start on the truckload list, as I've said, I think truckload and the dedicated truckload sector was really strong this year. And PAM Transport and Universal Logistics really pushed ahead with 40.4% and 37.7% growth, respectively, for the two. And that's just in that sector. So when you start to look at just in terms of what they're doing for the truckload and dedicated, that growth is really, really big. And I think speaks volumes to what they're doing. Moving into the intermodal and drayage, I was talking a bit about IMC companies making those smart acquisitions. Their intermodal and drayage revenue in that sector was up 130% year over year. Though I think really, really reflective on the smart acquisitions they had made in those areas. But big growth in intermodal and drayage. I think you see a little more of just stable growth in the LTL and flatbed sectors this year. Mercer Transportation grew in the flatbed revenue by 73% to over $528 million. That's strong. And R&R Express, grew over 50% as well in flatbed. I think overall, like we're saying, the year was great. Truckload, really strong, intermodal, really strong, flatbed. Overall, I think it was the only sector where I really saw growth that was evenly dispersed amongst almost every company. I will note, in terms of sectors themselves, refrigerated sector didn't do great this year. I don't really know what's up with that. I did a little looking into the companies. Some were good, some were average, but nothing crazy. A lot of 6%, a lot of 5% increases, a couple downgrades in terms of loss of revenue, a little less this year than last year. But besides Hirschbach Motor Lines pushing up 23%, there was very little double-digit growth for the top 10 in refrigerated. And I don't know exactly what that says for that market for the last year, but if anything, I just think it shows how exaggerated the growth was for some of these other sectors that we saw banner years for.
Transport topics in one word: authoritative.
Knowledge. Outstanding.
Reliable.
We asked Transport Topics readers to describe us in one word.
Informative.
Informative.
Integrity.
The Bible.
Authoritative.
The authority.
Transportation information, that's two, but I gotta have it both.
Physically large. Oh, that's 2 words.
Visit influence.ttnews.com/say hello to find out what they're talking about.
Of course, the main value, I think, of this project each year, is the top 100 list, and as well as the sector lists. But we also designed the publication to serve as an annual snapshot of the trucking industry. And we've already been discussing a lot of those trends with workforce development and the general business conditions. And really, it's an opportunity for us to really explore those trends and take a step back from the daily and weekly grind of transport topics to really look at the mega trends and the big issues that are altering the business landscape for all these companies. And this year in particular, we took some time to look back at how the coronavirus pandemic has changed the trucking industry in ways that have lasted well beyond the initial lockdowns and disruptions over the past couple of years. So examples of that include acceleration of e-commerce. E-commerce had been growing for years, of course, but the pandemic just supercharged that trend. We've seen an ongoing reevaluation of supply chains, and not just a focus on supply chain efficiency, but also increasingly a focus on supply chain resiliency. So that's changing the just-in-time model a little bit. Maybe some manufacturers and retailers and other companies are considering their supply chains and considering nearshoring or reshoring as they see some of the disruptions. When you rely on trans-Pacific trade. And also just the staying power of remote work for office employees, for your back offices, more flexibility and just a change in the expectations there that we've seen that really across much of the economy in many workplaces. But Marissa, what are some of the other big trends that you see reflected, in this year's publication, when you look back and think about the kind of the big picture for the trucking industry?
Yeah, I think big picture overall is, despite all the things getting thrown at the trucking industry, growth is almost inevitable at this point. And it has been for, I think, about 2 years now, really coming out of this. I think suppliers are just looking for consistency in service, and the truckload and dedicated sector, those companies are delivering. And I think that's why we're seeing such great growth. They're pricing themselves right. They're making the money. They're able to really provide their drivers with good pay. And overall, that strong sector is really what leads, I think, our top 100 list. And then piggybacking off of intermodal and drayage, there's been so many slow ups last year, and port problems both internationally and locally. But companies are prepared to face the challenge. They've been up against these challenges for a couple years now, and I think they figured it out. And we're seeing that again in just revenue growth that is consistent across a lot of companies, pretty much top down on the top 100. But I mean, honestly, if we're looking at this coming year, I think I feel like there might be a cool off. Like you were saying, inflation and uncertainties are definitely around the corner. But nonetheless, I think we're still going to see growth. I don't think we're going to see the 40%, the 100%, but I think we might get back down to a number that is more normal with an average year. That 5 to 10% growth, business still doing well. But I think it might piggyback into, depending on what type of digression the market takes. This might be a coming year for mergers and acquisitions, as maybe some of these small operations slow down and they aren't making as much in revenue. I think that's something that I'd like to keep an eye out for, really seeing how that might affect. But I think overall we saw a strong year in last year. We're going to see another one, but I don't think it's going to be as exciting, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And, I think that's some pretty good guidance. And, certainly think that carriers will have to defend their rates a little bit, perhaps. If they and it'll be important for them to do that because they've raised these rates in many cases to support driver pay increases. That's not going to go away. That's still very important. Once you do that, you can't go back. So that might be the argument that they'll need to make if some of their shipper customers start to try to claw back on contract rates. So that'll be part of the conversation moving forward, and also to your broader point about the industry really, in a sense, proving itself during all the disruptions. Of course, the past couple of years, past year in particular, in 2021, yes, it was a great time for business. Freight demand was really through the roof as some of that pent up demand got back into the system, and uh, there's just that much more freight to move. But um, even though demand was up, so were headaches, right? It's so many more pain points for shippers, so many more disruptions, so many more. The unexpected always happens in transportation, but not on the level that we've seen in the past 2 years, of course. So, the industry in many ways proved itself by working through those challenges, making sure that they're doing their part to keep goods moving. And even though at times it was painful and difficult, it was also rewarding financially for these companies and their employees. And hopefully that continues well into this year, into the second half of this year and beyond. Finally, we've spent all this time talking about putting together our top 100 list and some of the industry trends we talk about as we look back at it. But of course, a big component and one of the main sort of engines of our top 100 is our survey. And we're always encouraging companies to participate in the project. We send out our annual survey and ask them to share details about their operations, their revenue, equipment count, employee count, and so on. So, again, I just want to encourage any company that's out there that's listening that wants to be on the radar in a publication like this to reach out to us. And you don't have to be the biggest company out there. We do publish data on quite a few mid-sized companies in our sector lists. So you don't necessarily have to be a huge organization to potentially qualify for a spot on one of those sector rankings. So with that, Marissa, just maybe just take us through how companies can get involved. So if you're interested, how can you participate in next year's Top 100 project if you haven't already, if you're not already doing so?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest part is to be a little proactive out there. We really do rely, as Seth, as you're saying, we rely on companies to be giving of their information. So if you want, reach out to us online at Transport Topics and ttnews.com. There, we'll always have a posting on our homepage when a survey is out and ready. So I'd say be for the top 100, be active in the months of May, looking for that information. You can always reach out to me at mgamash@ttnews.com. I'm more than happy to get you on our list. Also, we have newsletters. If you subscribe to our newsletters, we'll start posting on there the survey as the time comes, so that you can get on there, get updated with us. Be sure that your profile is updated. And also, we're on social media, so take a look. We'll post the survey on Facebook, on Twitter, on our LinkedIn, in hopes to be sure that no one is left out. Because it definitely helps us have an all-encompassing view. And if we do miss you, there's always an opportunity to get in next year. I think we find a lot of times companies realize kind of after the fact, oh, now that I've heard about it, let's be sure that we're on the calendar for next year. So just reach out, be in communication. We appreciate all the companies' help. I think we also really appreciate the help that we get for our LTL list. SJ Consulting has helped us with estimates for both that and the top 100. And we've used information for our mail sector from Culhane Meadows. That's just been really important. So it kind of takes a village to put this together, but get in touch with us and we'll be sure that you get the news when you need it.
Yeah, and Marissa, you shoulder the lion's share of the data part of this project. So thank you as well for all the work that goes into this project. It is a massive undertaking each year. It's probably the most complex, and well, it is the most complex and detailed project that we produce each year at Transport Topics. So thank you for that, and thanks for joining the podcast and sharing some of your insights on how it all comes together. Like I said, this is one of our biggest projects each year, so it always feels great to see it all come together in the end.
Yeah, of course. No, I appreciate it. It's always fun. It definitely keeps us busy, but I'm so happy to be a part of it and appreciate working together to get it to the finish line. It's been great.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.
So we hope you've enjoyed this in-depth look at Transport Topics 2022 Top 100 For-Hire Carriers list. And as a reminder, yet again, you can view the entire Top 100 and sector lists online at ttnews.com. And of course, if you're a Transport Topics subscriber, you already have a hard copy packaged with the June 20th issue of TT. So later this year, we'll present additional episodes of our Inside the List series as we produce the rest of our annual Top 100 and Top 50 publications. The next one up will be our Top 100 Private Carriers list in August. If you've enjoyed this episode of RoadSigns, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with me and the RoadSigns team. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode of RoadSigns. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.